Hi, everyone. Today we are going to continue our topic of thermoregulation. We're going to finish up the lesson from yesterday, and then we're going to continue on to a little short lesson on something new. So the other day, we started talking about size and metabolic rate. And this slide sort of summarizes everything nicely. It says that even though the total metabolic expenditure of an elephant is going to be greater than a mouse, if we look at the per gram, so if we take a look at, per unit of mass, smaller animals have higher metabolic rates than larger animals. All right, so across all endotherms, the basal metabolic rate per gram of tissue is going to increase as an animal gets smaller. So here we have a shrew, very small, a mouse, very small, and as the animals get bigger, rat, cat, dog, sheep, the total metabolic rate goes down. And that's because of heat production. Heat production is a function of the animal's volume, but the capacity to dissipate heat is a function of the surface area, right? The surface area is like the exit for the heat. Therefore, it's all related to that surface area to volume ratio. Larger animals evolved lower metabolic rates to avoid overheating. Like an elephant, very susceptible to overheating. Less so true with a mouse and a shrew. Activity greatly affects metabolic rate for endotherms and ectotherms. So in general, the maximum metabolic rate an animal can sustain is inversely related to the duration of the activity. So here we have a mouse and here we have an elephant. So mice are able to do shorter, quicker movements, whereas elephants are going to have long and prolonged movements, but they're not going to be particularly, fast like a smaller animal. Different species use different energy budgets, basically. Depending on the species, the way they partition the energy is going to be different, very different, depending on their adaptations, depending on their environment. Dividing up their metabolic rate, dividing up their energy on metabolism, various activities, thermoregulation, growth, and reproduction. We see some examples of that here. Even amongst the different endotherms, we see the energy budget can be very different, right? Here we have a small mouse that's devoting a lot to thermoregulation because they're losing heat very quickly. So we've got a lot of different strategies here. A snake is not going to have any energy in its budget for thermoregulation because it's not going to thermoregulate, but it has more for growth and activity and reproduction and metabolism. A few behavioral adaptations that evolved. So during a certain portion of the day, it may be beneficial to lower the body temperature to prevent an animal from expending too much energy trying to thermoregulate. So we call that torpor. Torpor is a physiological state in which activity is low and metabolism decreases. So this allows animals to save energy, and it also allows them to sort of sleep or find somewhere safe to go when there's difficult and dangerous conditions. So they're saving energy and they're avoiding being out in conditions that would make it hard for them to find food. A more extreme adaptation for conserving energy and surviving cold weather is hibernation. Hibernation is torpor that lasts for multiple days. The body temperature goes way, way down, so you're saving energy. So hibernation is long-term torpor that is an adaptation to winter cold, food scarcity, which is often going to happen during winter as well. All right, so here we have showing the torpor. So here we have the lowering of the metabolic rate. All right, and then we can see that at some point the metabolic activity goes way, way up to arouse the animal out of hibernation. And then it goes back down. And during this time of rest, the body temperature also decreases pretty low. Now, there's something else called estivation, summer torpor, where we're hibernating because of the heat instead of the cold, allows animals to survive long periods at high temperatures. So this is really something to help animals deal with scarce water or temperatures that are extremely high. So, yeah, that is, those are two adaptations. Now, we're going to move on to talking more about homeostasis. So we're going to look at more about energy usage and more about maintaining homeostasis. We're going to go through only part of this today. Okay, so some of this, just be aware, some of this is going to be a little bit of review. So you're going to see some things in here that are repeated, but then we're going to dive a little deeper into some of these concepts. So faced with environmental fluctuations, animals manage their internal environment. They're either going to regulate their own environment or they're just going to conform, like an endotherm or an exotherm. And always remember that maintaining homeostasis is the key to any animal's survival. Again, a regulator is going to use an internal mechanism to control internal change despite changes happening on the outside. And a conformer is going to allow its internal conditions to change in accordance with the external changes. So we typically think about this in terms of thermoregulation, with endotherms keeping their temperatures the same, and ectotherms allowing their temperatures to fluctuate with the environment, like we see with this fish and the otter over here. An animal may regulate some internal conditions, but not others. So just because an animal is a regulator does not mean they regulate everything. They might regulate their own temperature, but they may not regulate other things or vice versa. So, for example, fish may conform to the surrounding temperature, but regulates its solute concentration in its blood and in its the fluid that's surrounding body cells. So organisms use homeostasis to maintain an internal balance, as we've already gone over. This should be a little bit of review. Temperature, pH, glucose concentration, we have a set point, and if we go above or below that set point, negative feedback loops should kick in to bring things back to normal, right? Just like this analogy that we've talked about before with the heater turning on or the heater turning off to keep our room at homeostasis. So animals achieve homeostasis by maintaining a variable at or near a set point. If there are fluctuations above or below the set point, that serves as a stimulus. It's detected by a sensor and it triggers a response, just like with the heater analogy. All right, and this gets into reviewing some of those feedback circuits that we've talked so much about this year. We have a negative feedback example with blood glucose levels. So this person's eating food, their blood glucose levels are going to go up. That's going to send a message to the pancreas. The pancreas is going to say, all right, we better release insulin. The pancreas produces insulin, and insulin is going to help take that glucose that is found in the blood, and it's going to store it as glycogen in the liver to lower blood glucose levels back down to a normal level. And then, of course, there's positive feedback, as we've talked about. Positive because it intensifies the change, like delivering a baby. The delivering of the baby puts pressure on the cervix. That pressure tells the brain to produce more oxytocin. Oxytocin tells the uterus to start contracting, and it tells the cervix to start dilating, which means to open up. And those extra contractions are going to cause the baby to push even more on the cervix, which is going to make the brain produce even more oxytocin, which is going to produce more contractions, and it keeps the process going over and over again. Homeostasis is maintained because all these different body systems work together as a team. Circulatory, respiratory, excretory, digestive. They're all involved with one another, even though we sort of learn about them separately. They're all involved in maintaining homeostasis. And if one gets messed up, then that can affect the balance of how the rest of the body systems are working. Numerous mechanisms constantly respond to various stimuli that are going to change because of the animal's behavior, because of changes in the environment. Now, as we have also talked about, and this is again review, there are alterations to homeostasis. Set points and normal ranges can change with age, or they can change through the course of a day. In the course of a day example, we're talking about circadian rhythms. So that's the pattern that our bodies go through every 24 hours. It's usually governed by light versus dark. So we can see that our body temperature is going to change over the course of the day. Usually when we are asleep, our body temperature dips, and then it goes back up as we wake up. And our melatonin concentration, which is a chemical found in our body, that's going to go up at night, kind of setting the stage for sleep. So once that melatonin kicks in, it tells our brain, all right, it's time to slow down, it's time to sleep. As the body temperature goes down, the melatonin goes up, and melatonin levels go down as we are readying ourselves to wake. And here are other patterns that we see. We can see that with circadian rhythms, we can see that the blood pressure is going to be the highest in the morning, which also correlates with the highest risk of cardiac arrest. These two things are related. Lowest body temperature and lowest heart rate during sleep. Greatest muscle strength in the evening. So there's different patterns throughout the day depending on what time of the day it is. All right, so thermoregulation, we've also already talked about this. We're going to get into it in a little more detail. Is a process by which animals maintain an internal temperature within a normal range. There are endotherms and there are ectotherms, right? We know this already. Endotherms, stable body temperature. Ectotherms regulate their temperatures. Again, this is review. So this third point is new. Ectotherms generally need to consume less food than endotherms because their heat source is the environment. So we eat a lot of food to maintain our temperature, whereas something like a lizard or maybe a fish doesn't have to go through that because their temperature doesn't need to be maintained. All right, so these next slides are going to be new and we're going to save those for next time. So for right now, I think we are good. And let me know if you have any questions.